Picture this: London, November 1979. The House of Commons is packed. Journalists crowd the press gallery. On the butterment front bench, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher rises, papers in hand. She has been asked a question that, until this morning, every British government had refused to answer in public. Did a man who held a royal appointment, who walked the halls of Buckingham Palace, who advised the Queen on her paintings, spy for the Soviet Union? Thatcher looks up and says the words that will detonate through Britain's establishment. Professor Blunt has admitted that he was a spy. For a moment, the chamber is stunned. Sir Anthony Blunt, Surveyor of the Queen's Pictures, revered art historian, Knight of the Royal Victorian Order, former MI5 officer, had already privately confessed 15 years earlier. But until the Prime Minister said it out loud, the full story had never been acknowledged. Now, suddenly, it's official. The Queen's own art advisor was part of the Cambridge spy ring. In Moscow, the KGB officers who had recruited him decades earlier must have felt a mix of satisfaction and anxiety. Satisfaction because this public admission confirmed the depth of their earlier success. Anxiety because it also meant that British and American intelligence had advanced far enough, technically, analytically, and politically, to drag even this secret into the light. To understand why that matters and why this story speaks to American pride, fascination, and curiosity about the Cold War, you have to wind the clock back nearly 50 years to a very different Anthony Blunt. He begins not as a spy, but as a scholar. Anthony Frederick Blunt is born in 1907, the third son of a British clergyman. He is educated at Marlborough College, then Trinity College, Cambridge, one of the university's most prestigious colleges. At first, he studies mathematics, then shifts toward modern languages, and finally art history. He is quiet, serious, intellectually rigorous. If you had walked into a Cambridge lecture hall in the early 1930s, you might have seen him at the blackboard, talking about French classicism, not revolution. But outside the classroom, Cambridge in those years is buzzing with politics. The Great Depression has wrecked economies. Fascism is rising across Europe. Many students, especially from privileged backgrounds, feel that the old order has failed. They look toward Marxism and the Soviet Union as a bold, if flawed, alternative. Blunt's friends include men like Guy Burgess, Kim Philby, and Donald MacLean. They argue late into the night about capitalism, fascism, and the future of Europe. Burgess, loud and charismatic, takes on the role of recruiter. Under his influence, Blunt moves from sympathy into action. By 1935-36, Blunt has been quietly recruited into Soviet service. Soviet agents in Britain, people like Arnold Deutsch, recognize that a Cambridge fellow from a good family with no public Communist Party card will be far more useful to them than a loud street protester. Burgess persuades Blunt not to join the party formally. It would be far easier, he argued, to climb into the British establishment without that stain on his record. Blunt agrees. He keeps his politics hidden. He pours his energy into scholarship. By the late 1930s, he is already making a name for himself as an art historian, publishing articles on Poussin and French classical art, helping to raise the status of art history as a serious academic discipline in Britain. Then, in 1939, war comes. Germany invades Poland. Britain and France declare war on Germany. A new question emerges for men like Blunt: how to act against fascism. Blunt joins the British Army's intelligence corps and is posted to France, where he serves until the German advance forces a British retreat and evacuation from Dunkirk. He is evacuated back to England. In 1940, MI5, the Domestic Security Service, is expanding quickly. It needs educated, trustworthy officers to help process an ever-growing stream of intelligence. Blunt, with his war service, Cambridge credentials, and references from people like his cousin, writer John Betjeman, is invited in. He accepts. On paper, he is now a British security officer, charged with finding spies and analyzing enemy activity. In reality, he is also a Soviet agent positioned inside one of the key nodes of British wartime intelligence system. His work at MI5 includes analyzing German military plans and intercepts. Much of this analysis depends on information coming from Bletchley Park, where British codebreakers are reading encrypted German communications under the codename Ultra. Blunt sees summarized Ultra-derived material on Wehrmacht deployments, battle plans, and even some details of German counterintelligence operations. Officially, Britain shares some intelligence with the Soviet Union after Hitler invades the USSR in 1941. Unofficially, Blunt shares more. From his desk in London, he passes to Soviet handlers selected pieces of intelligence that the British themselves have decided not to share through official channels, either to protect the secret of Ultra or because they want to keep certain insights to themselves. For Soviet commanders facing the Wehrmacht, this stream of material from a British art historian inside MI5 is an unexpected bonus. It means that, at least in some sectors, the Red Army is fighting with the benefit of British decrypts that the British government is too cautious to acknowledge openly. At the same time, Blunt's position gives him another power, the ability to protect others. With access to MI5 files, he can see who is under suspicion, whose phones are tapped, whose mail is opened. That lets him warn fellow agents, primarily people like Burgess and Maclean, when investigations get close. In effect, the British organization responsible for catching spies is itself compromised. During the war, his MI5 work is invisible to the public. What people see is his academic trajectory. He keeps publishing, he keeps teaching, he keeps building a reputation as one of the brightest minds in his field. When the war ends in 1945, Blunt quietly leaves MI5. On the open record, he returns to art. That same year, he is appointed Surveyor of the King's Pictures, responsible for the care and cataloging of the royal art collection. It is a prestigious position in the royal household. It means access to Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, and other royal residences. It means direct contact with the monarchy. In 1947, he becomes director of the Courtauld Institute of Art, a small but influential institution that he will build into one of the world's leading centers for art history. Under his leadership, generations of students come to study Rembrandt, Poussin, Rubens, and more. In 1956, he is knighted, becoming Sir Anthony Blunt, KCVO, in recognition of his service to the crown. He now has on his shoulders the same honor that American presidents and generals receive when they visit Britain. To the public, he is a model figure, a bridge between high culture and the royal family. To Soviet intelligence, he remains Johnson or Tony, a trusted source embedded at the heart of British life. In 1951, when MI5's Venona-assisted investigation into the Soviet spy Homer closes in on Donald Maclean, Anthony Blunt plays a direct role in the next chapter of the Cambridge saga. As the net tightens around Maclean, the KGB decides he must flee before MI5 can interrogate him. Guy Burgess is recalled from Washington to London to help arrange it. In the days before they leave, Burgess and Maclean spend time at Blunt's flat in London, using it as a safe place to meet and plan. Blunt knows they are jumping ship. He helps smooth their departure with money and contacts. On May 25, 1951, Burgess and Maclean disappear, first to France, then ultimately to Moscow. Blunt stays where he is. The shock of the Burgess-Maclean defection ripples through MI5 and MI6. Suspicion falls on their friends and associates. Blunt is questioned multiple times, but he denies everything. There is no hard evidence to link him directly to the escape. As the 1950s turn into the 1960s, the wider picture of Soviet penetration slowly comes into focus. In 1950, Klaus Fuchs is convicted of spying in Britain. In 1953, the Rosenbergs are executed in the United States. In 1963, Kim Philby vanishes from Beirut and reappears in Moscow as a KGB colonel, confirming that a third member of the Cambridge Circle was at the heart of British intelligence. Each exposure has two sides. From Moscow's perspective, it shows how effective their recruitment of Western elites was. From Washington and London's perspective, it shows how far they need to go in building a more rigorous, technologically informed counterintelligence system. American and British services respond with a mix of traditional detective work, close cooperation, and technology. They continue to exploit Venona, which has already revealed some of the code names and traffic associated with Soviet networks. They interrogate defectors like Anatoly Golitsyn. They cross-match testimony, telegrams, and old personnel files. By 1963 to 1964, the circle of suspicion around Anthony Blunt tightens. Kim Philby, now safely in Moscow, knows who recruited him and who else was in the Cambridge ring. His knowledge, combined with that of other sources, and with what is already known from intercepted traffic, points inexorably towards Blunt. But there is still a problem. Most of the evidence is classified or comes from intercepts and defectors whose identities cannot be revealed in court without compromising ongoing operations. Venona exists, but cannot be publicly discussed. MI5 cannot simply arrest Blunt and expect a conviction. They face a choice that would be hard to explain on any political campaign trail. Do you try to prosecute a man with insufficient admissible evidence and risk acquittal, or do you bargain? In early 1964, MI5 and the Attorney General chose the second path. They authorized an extraordinary offer: full immunity from prosecution if and only if, Anthony Blunt makes a complete confession and provides detailed information on Soviet intelligence operations and agents in Britain. They confront him in April 1964. He takes the deal. He admits that he was recruited into Soviet espionage in the 1930s while at Cambridge. He admits that he spied for the Soviets while at MI5 during the war. He admits that he helped Burgess and McLean. He identifies other contacts. He provides a map of his own activities. His confession, recorded in MI5 files, runs to many pages. It confirms, in his own words, what some in the security world had suspected for years. In exchange, he walks out of the interview a free man. The public is not told. The Queen is not given the full, explicit story. Her private secretary is told that there has been a security issue, but not that Blunt was a long-term Soviet agent. The thinking inside Whitehall is that the scandal of exposing a royal appointee as a spy would do more damage than the quiet, controlled handling of the case. So Blunt keeps his positions. He remains director of the Courtauld Institute until 1974. He continues as surveyor of the King's Pictures until 1972. He continues to give lectures, write books, and appear in public as Sir Anthony Blunt, KCVO. Inside MI5 and at the top of government, a small number of people know the truth. For 15 years, they keep it secret. Then, in the late 1970s, the political wind shifts.
The Cambridge spies are now widely discussed in the press. Books and articles speculate about the identity of the fourth man. The satirical magazine Private Eye names Blunt openly. Journalists push the government for an answer. Was a knight of the realm connected to the royal household really a KGB agent? Margaret Thatcher, newly elected Prime Minister in 1979, has a decision to make. She can maintain the fiction, stonewalling questions and preserving the arrangement made in 1964, or she can blow the secret open. On November 21, 1979, she chooses the second option. In the House of Commons, responding to a direct question, she reads out a statement that lays out the essentials, that in 1964, after receiving immunity, Professor Blunt confessed that for several years he had been a Soviet agent. She explains that there was no admissible evidence at the time to secure a conviction, that the immunity was granted to obtain information, and that Blunt cooperated thereafter. By the time she sits down, Britain has a new, undeniable fact in its public record. The Queen's former art advisor was a Soviet spy. The reaction is immediate. The palace announces that his knighthood is cancelled, university institutions distance themselves, some of his former students and colleagues express shock, others admit they had long felt something was off. Blunt, now in his 70s, gives a brief television interview outside his home. He calls his earlier espionage the biggest mistake of my life, but insists that in the 1930s he believed the Soviet Union was the only serious force resisting fascism. He says he thought, naively, that his confession would remain secret forever. He retreats into isolation and dies in 1983, his reputation permanently split between great art historian and traitor. So what does this story say to Americans, especially about the Cold War balance between Soviet espionage and Western technology? Look at it from both sides. From Moscow's perspective, Anthony Blunt is a textbook case of how to exploit an open, class-based society. They take a gifted Cambridge student from a good family. They recruit him quietly. They tell him to keep his politics hidden. They let British institutions do the rest. Cambridge gives him a fellowship, MI5 gives him a desk, the Courtauld gives him a department directorship, the Crown gives him a knighthood and a role in the royal household. No Soviet officer could have dreamed of walking into those jobs. A Soviet agent, wearing the right tie and speaking the right language, did. For years, that model works. Blunt feeds Moscow intelligence from inside MI5. He helps protect and guide other agents like Burgess and McLean. He acts as a silent bridge between Bletchley Park's secrets and Soviet military planners. On that level, the Soviet intelligence service looks impressively successful. Now look at how that success ends. It does not end because a single policeman gets lucky or because a random tipster calls in. It ends because, over decades, American and British intelligence used technology and modern analytic methods to build a picture of Soviet networks that the KGB did not believe possible. They break parts of Soviet cipher traffic with Venona. They track the movements and contradictions of people like Philby. They interrogate defectors like Gulutzin. They cross-reference names, travel records, and code names. By the early 1960s, they are in a position to go to Blunt and say, "We know enough to be sure. We cannot prove it in open court, but we can prove it enough to you." They then make a calculated, ruthless decision to trade public justice for intelligence advantage. They think in terms of systems. What will give us the best long-term leverage against Soviet operations? One show trial or a complete map of a spy ring and its methods? They choose the second. That may not satisfy an emotional desire for punishment, but it is a reminder of something crucial about how the West fought the Cold War. It was not just with weapons, it was with choices about information. By the time Thatcher announces Blunt's treachery in 1979, the wider Cold War landscape has shifted again. American satellites are photographing Soviet missile sites from orbit. American and British signal intercept stations are listening to Soviet communications around the globe. Early computers are processing signals and decrypts at speeds unimaginable in 1940. The Soviet Union, for all its human spy successes, is struggling to keep up with the sheer pace of technological change. It continues to rely heavily on agents in Western capitals to understand the other side. The United States increasingly relies on its own tools and brains. Anthony Blunt's story sits right at that intersection. He is both a symbol of how dangerous human espionage can be and a symbol of how that danger can be contained and exposed by a system that learns, adapts, and harnesses technology. He shows how deeply the Soviets could get into the British elite. He also shows how, in the end, they could not keep one of their best placements entirely safe from the slow, relentless work of Western codebreakers, analysts, and decision-makers. For Americans watching this history on a digital screen today, there is a particular resonance. The side that had to recruit a royal art advisor to see inside the British state, that side is gone. The side that built the machines and institutions that slowly uncovered him and then had the luxury 15 years later of letting the Prime Minister reveal that fact to a free parliament in a free press environment, that side is the one you live in. And that's part of why stories like Anthony Blunt's, for all their betrayal, still carry a note of quiet pride on your side of the ocean.